Thanks for leading that, Steve, and putting yourself out there with a new song. Appreciate that. Good morning, everyone. It's wonderful to see you all out here this morning. I'm grateful for the opportunity to be speaking before you this morning. And I've always gotten a bit nervous getting up in front of all of you, but I think as I've gotten older and hopefully matured, that I've become more humbled by it. Just the privilege and the burden, the responsibility to deliver truth from the Scriptures in a way that's beneficial and helpful and accurate, truthful, and I want it to be helpful for all of us. So if this morning anything I say you think deviates from what we find in Scriptures, you'd be my friend to bring that up to me. God's still doing work in me and will continue to do that as long as I have breath and allow Him to do that work. And I'd also say, and I think it'd be true for the other speakers as well, that if you have something that you agree with or you found encouraging, that you want to tell me that as well. We encourage all kinds of feedback. But I hope what I have to share this morning is going to be a good reminder and good encouragement and to bring us hope. Because that's what I want to talk about this morning is hope. We live in a world that's just filled with 24-hour news cycles. Every time you turn on the news or you pull up your news feed on your phone, right, you hear about more bad news. People are dying, there's earthquakes, fires, bombings, there's shootings, death, destruction, and decay. And then on top of that, we have things in our own personal lives that we struggle with. Even what Steve brought up today, I didn't even realize it was an exact anniversary of Brett and Wendy. But there are so many things that we grieve over, things that cause us sorrow, things that break our heart, and people need hope. And I think that's why, especially today, churches throughout the country, around the world, are filled with people because people know that Easter has something to do with hope, and people need hope. I need hope. As I've gotten older, it seems I hear more and more about death. Sometimes I had this idea that maybe the death of an older friend or relative perhaps would be easier to bear, to know and have more time to think about it, to prepare for it, that we could maybe predict that it's coming, and maybe it wouldn't hurt quite as bad. And perhaps that's been your experience, that when someone we don't expect to die dies, that hurts worse. But no matter what the situation is, death stings. Death hurts. Losing loved ones stings. Even hearing tragedies where people that we don't even know have lost their lives in some tragedy, that stings. I don't know how many people you've lost in your life, how many loved ones that you've had taken away from you by death, or how much that's affected your life, but I do know that you need hope and that I need hope. And I don't like starting the sermon talking about death, but how do you talk about the hope that the resurrection brings us without talking about the reality of death? The reason we need hope is because we live in this world where there are constant reminders of death, and death is the enemy. 1 Corinthians 15 tells us death's an enemy of God and of God's people. Death's an intruder on God's good world, and death is, and I think this is particularly important, because we're going to be in the Gospel of John this morning, and John is all about creation, and the Creator, Jesus, coming into the world, bringing about rebirth and new creation. So it's important for us to recognize that death is, and here's maybe a new word for you, uncreation. Death's the opposite of creation. Death's when things that God has created become uncreated. You think about a human being, what is it that God has made people out of? We're told God made us out of the dirt, the earth, the dust. He formed us and He breathed into us life. And death is literally human beings becoming undone. It's uncreation. So for anyone who's grieving, who has grieved, who will grieve, and that's all of us, right? I think this lesson, the truth of the resurrection, brings us hope. But before we go on, here's kind of my definition, working definition of hope. Hope is the confident expectation about the future that gives us strength in the present. Confident expectation about the future that gives us hope, or gives us strength in the present. Hope's incredibly practical, and it's powerful, because it's not just about the future, about something you have this expectation of, but it's something that gives you strength in the present. And that's what the resurrection does for us. The truth of the resurrection brings us hope now. So the story we're going to look at is that of Lazarus. So we'll be in John chapter 11 this morning. You want to turn there. Lazarus, if you don't know, he was a good friend of Jesus. He was somebody that Jesus loved for, and he cared deeply for him. And he had two sisters, Mary and Martha, and Jesus loved this whole family. I'm not going to stop and comment on everything that John tells us, but rather than me summarize it, I'm just going to go ahead and we're going to read how John starts this story in John chapter 11, starting in verse 1. Now a certain man was ill, Lazarus of Bethany, the village of Mary and her sister Martha. It was Mary who anointed the Lord with ointment and wiped his feet with her hair, whose brother Lazarus was ill. So the sisters sent to him, saying, Lord, he whom you love is ill. But when Jesus heard it, he said, This illness does not lead to death. It is for the glory of God, so that the Son of God may be glorified through it. Now Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus. So when he heard that Lazarus was ill, he stayed 2 days longer in the place he was. Then after this, he said to his disciples, Let us go to Judea again. The disciples said to him, Rabbi, the Jews were just now seeking to stone you, and you're going there again? Jesus answered, Are there not 12 hours in the day? If anyone walks in the day, he does not stumble, because he sees the light of this world. But if anyone walks in the night, he stumbles because the light is not in him. After saying these things, he said to them, Our friend Lazarus has fallen asleep, but I go to awaken him. The disciples said to him, Lord, if he's fallen asleep, he will recover. Now Jesus had spoken of his death, but they thought he meant taking rest and sleep. Then Jesus told them plainly, Lazarus has died, and for your sake I'm glad I was not there, so that you may believe. But let us go to him. So Thomas, called the twin, said to his fellow disciples, Let us also go, that we may die with him. Now when Jesus came, he found Lazarus had already been in the tomb 4 days. Bethany was near Jerusalem, about 2 miles off, and many of the Jews had come to Martha and Mary to console them concerning their brother. So we read here, Lazarus is sick. He's really sick, and such that they knew this sickness was fatal. So they did what you would do. They asked Jesus, come and help. And there was plenty of time for Jesus to come and help, to make Lazarus better, to heal him and make it so that he didn't die. But Jesus did something surprising. He intentionally waited, and he didn't come to heal Lazarus in time and make him better. But he does come, and by the time that Jesus shows up, then Lazarus has already been in the grave for 4 days. And the house is filled with mourners and family and friends, everybody who's come to grieve the passing of Lazarus, somebody that everyone, including Jesus, loved dearly. Continue in verse 20. So when Martha heard that Jesus was coming, she went and met him, but Mary remained seated in the house. Martha said to Jesus, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. But even now I know that whatever you ask from God, God will give you. This is a phrase, an idea that's repeated 3 times in the text here this morning. If you had been here, Lazarus wouldn't have died. You could have made him better. And all Martha seems to be doing here is expressing her faith in Jesus' ability. Even when she says this, that even now, I know whatever you ask from God, God will give you. Even now in my disappointment, even now in my grief, even now in my sorrow, I know that you're a healer. She's not expecting Jesus to raise Lazarus from the dead, but she's still saying, I know you. I know you could have answered this prayer. We sent for you. We gave you time, and you could have come here. Maybe she's a little bit angry. We don't know, but I'd say mostly she's disappointed. And you've experienced that, haven't you? I've experienced that. When someone we love is sick, they're hurting, they're on death's doorstep, and you're praying and you're asking and saying, God, I know you. I know that you can do whatever it is you want to do, and you can make this person better. And sometimes that answer is no, and it's incredibly disappointing. Verse 23, Jesus said to her, your brother will rise again. Martha said to him, I know that he'll rise again in the resurrection on the last day. You see, all the Jews, except for the Sadducees, that's what made the Sadducees different as a group, is they didn't believe in a coming bodily resurrection. They didn't believe that, but everybody else, including Jesus and his apostles, believed that the last day, that when history or when the timeline itself ran out, on the very last day, that God would raise the wicked and the righteous, and there would be a judgment, and that he would reward the righteous. So they all believed that that was coming at the end. At the very end, eventually, there would be a resurrection. So when Jesus says your brother will rise again, Martha thinks, well, yeah, I know that. Everyone knows that there's going to be this resurrection. I understand that. But right now, what do I have? Right now, what's going to bring me comfort and strength? So listen to what Jesus says in verse 25. Jesus said to her, I am the resurrection and the life. Whoever believes in me, though he die, yet shall he live. And everyone who lives and believes in me shall never die. Do you believe this? This is where I want to spend our time this morning. Because Jesus is saying something for Mary, for Martha, for you and me, everyone who reads this text. Should be an incredible paradigm shift about our hope. Because Jesus says not only that resurrection is something he can do, he says resurrection is something he is. And this is another case in John of Jesus reorienting all their hopes and their expectations around him. I am the bread of heaven. I am the temple of God. I am the resurrection and the life. You might think about it this way. Think about maybe the worst winter you can remember. Every year it seems we get at least a week here or there that's just brutally cold and terrible. I know a few years ago, I think there were 3 weeks where it dipped below freezing and never came up even for a minute. And during that, there were the days that are 0 degrees, and our water comes from a well, and our pump's out in one of our sheds, and I've got a little sensor and an app that warns me if it's getting too cold so my pipes don't freeze. And we use firewood, so it seems like you just keep adding wood, and it's just the house is not getting warmer. That you're warm next to it, but get too far away from that fire, right? And you're just always struggling, fighting against this cold. And it's just, you look at the forecast, and it just looks like this is never going to end, right? When you're in the midst of that, it feels like this is never going to come to an end. And I think that's how life can seem sometimes. When we're going through these hard things, especially when you've just buried a loved one, it seems like this hope's just elusive. But imagine that's all you've ever known. Imagine you've never experienced spring. You've heard about it. You intellectually know, okay, spring exists, but I've never seen it. You're just in this state of perpetual winter, and it's all you've known. And you could say, yeah, I know spring's coming eventually, right? But right now, all I know is winter. And then you would hear Jesus say, I'm the spring. How would that feel? Not, I'm going to bring the spring, or I'll bring it about, but I am the spring right now. In the middle of winter, I am the spring bursting forth. Winter's still going on, but I'm the spring. Or to put it in a metaphor John uses all the time, in the middle of darkness, I am the light. I'm the daylight bursting into the middle of the night. I'm the age to come bursting forth in the middle of this age. I'm the new creation bursting forth in the middle of the old creation. Just picture that in your head, a whole world of winter, a whole world of night, and in this one spot there's springtime, or there's light. Jesus is saying not, I can do resurrection, or I have the power of resurrection, but I am the resurrection and the life. We'll come back to that in just a second. So Jesus asks her, do you believe this? And she says to him in verse 27, Lord, yes, Lord, I believe that you are the Christ, the Son of God, who's coming into the world. When she had said this, she went and called her sister Mary, saying in private, the teacher's here and is calling for you. So imagine again, the house is packed with people. There's family and friends and mourners, and they're all grieving. And it's like Martha kind of slips in, maybe whispers in her ear, the teacher's here. He's calling for you. Verse 29, when she heard it, she rose quickly and went to him. Now Jesus had not yet come into the village, but was still in the place where Martha had met him. When the Jews who were with her in the house consoling her saw Mary rise quickly and go out, they followed her, supposing that she was going to the tomb to weep there. Now when Mary came to where Jesus was and saw him, she fell at his feet, saying to him, "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died." Put yourself in Mary's place. We read this truth from the Gospels, but she knew it. She's seen Jesus' power to heal, to give sight to the blind, to make the lame able to walk. So when you see the fact that Jesus has the power to heal your loved ones and keep them from dying, your biggest question is, then why didn't you do it? But it's kind of a misunderstanding of the mission of Jesus, isn't it? Jesus didn't come just to extend everyone's mortal lives a little bit longer. You go back to the metaphors we've been thinking of darkness and light, of the age that is and the age to come, the winter and the spring. Jesus didn't come just to make winter longer. He came to be the spring, the age to come in the middle of this age bursting forth. He came to be the daylight of a new day dawning, a day in which death and disease and decay and destruction will be a thing of the past. But when you're in the midst of that, when somebody you love is dying and hurting, your only prayer is just extend their life even longer. Make them well. And so when Jesus didn't show up, Mary's question was the same as Martha's question. Why not? If you had been here, my brother would not have died. Verse 33, when Jesus saw her weeping, and the Jews who had come with her also weeping, he was deeply moved in his spirit and greatly troubled. I've heard that in the Greek, and I think the New Living actually translates it this way, that when he's greatly troubled, it's like he's angry. It's almost like a horse snorting, you know that sound? I'm not going to try and imitate that for you this morning. But that feeling when you're just so upset. That's the way Jesus is, right? Why? What's making him so upset? There could be lots of things here, but I think it's good to know that God is just as troubled. He's just as upset, just as angry about this world of sin and death and brokenness and decay and destruction in which the humanity that he loves so much has been exiled. God's just as troubled about that as we are. He was deeply moved and troubled. Verse 34. And he said, "Where have you laid him?" They said to him, "Lord, come and see." And Jesus wept. So the Jews said, "See how he loved him." But some of them said, "Could not he who opened the eyes of the blind man have also kept this man from dying?" Again, that's the same question for the third time. If he had just been here, he would have extended this man's life and he wouldn't have died. Verse 38, then Jesus, deeply moved again, came to the tomb. It was a cave and a stone lay against it. So now just picture all this in your head. They've had all these conversations, and now they've come to the grave. Mary and Martha have no expectation that Jesus is going to raise Lazarus from the dead. It's evidenced even further by what they're going to say here, but they're probably thinking, where have you laid him? Because he wants to visit the grave. I want to go there. I want to weep and cry because I loved him and he was my friend. So they all go to the tomb, and there's this huge stone there rolled in front of it. So they're standing there, and that's what they expect Jesus to do. He's going to weep and he's going to mourn. But it says this in verse 39. Jesus said, "Take away the stone." Martha, the sister of the dead man, said to him, "Lord, by this time there will be an odor, for he's been dead for 4 days." Jesus said to her, "Did I not tell you that if you believed, you would see the glory of God?" So they took away the stone, and Jesus lifted up his eyes and said, "Father, I thank you that you have heard me. I know that you knew that you always heard me, but I said this on account of people standing around, that they may believe that you sent me." When he said these things, he cried out with a loud voice, "Lazarus, come out!" The man who had died came out, his hands and feet bound with linen strips, his face wrapped with a cloth. Jesus said to them, "Unbind him and let him go." Now let's kind of think about what this story means. Anytime we read through the gospel account of John, John is telling us that things that Jesus did were called signs. And just like a street sign points to something, points to something else outside of itself, the sign tells us something. And Jesus already told us in verse 25 what it was all about. You see, Lazarus, he's not that spring that's bursting forth into winter. Lazarus, when he's raised from the dead, he comes out bodily, but eventually he's going to die again. He still has a body that's going to decay and die, and he'll die again. He'll go back to the grave. Lazarus isn't that spring bursting forth into the winter. Lazarus isn't the light bursting forth into the night. Lazarus isn't the new creation bursting forth into old creation. Who is? Jesus. The resurrection of Lazarus is a sign that's pointing forward to the rest of the story. Because we know Jesus too will die. He'll give his life, he'll be laid in a tomb, and that he'll come forth bodily from that tomb. That tomb's going to be empty. He'll be raised from the dead. But just as importantly, it points to the truth and reality of verse 25, I am the resurrection and the life. This sign points us to the resurrection and the identity of Jesus. This being raised from the dead in some ways is similar to what Jesus will experience, right? They're both dead, they're both laid in tomb, and they both came forth. But in many ways, it's very different because at Jesus' resurrection, we know he's raised with a transformed, an immortal, an imperishable body. And that's what we're promised too, isn't it? Those of us that are in Christ Jesus, all of Jesus' people will experience resurrection. Do we realize that? Do we realize our final ultimate hope is resurrection? And when we say resurrection, we mean what the scriptures mean. The tomb of Lazarus was empty. The tomb of Jesus was empty. And our grave will be empty. Not like Lazarus, to die again, but you'll be raised like Jesus to never die again, as 1 Corinthians 15 says, with an immortal and imperishable body. You'll be raised to never die. That's our hope. Our hope that the resurrection of Lazarus points to, not because we have this hope and idea of resurrection, but we have this hope in the person of Jesus Christ, who said, I am the resurrection and the life. And think about those two things. I am the resurrection, and that whoever believes in me, though he die, because that's the reality of living in this winter body, so to speak, right? Is that it's decaying and dying. Though he die, because Jesus is the resurrection, if you believe in him, though you die, yet shall you live. It's future tense, right? That's our future hope. Even though we die, and even though so many of our friends and loved ones and those we know in Christ have died, that we love and we cherish, my hope is in resurrection. Not in just the idea of resurrection, but the person, Jesus, who is the resurrection. He's the age to come, bursting forth. When he came out that Sunday morning, resurrection had begun. When he came forth, the new day, the age to come, the springtime, the daylight had already all begun to burst forth right in the middle of all of this. Jesus says, I am the resurrection. Whoever believes in me, though he die, yet shall he live. But he also says, I am the life. Whoever lives and believes in me shall never die. That's your present reality. Do we understand that? That when we live and we believe in Jesus, we've already received, we already possess life for the age to come. We already possess eternal life. But right now, you live because you believe in Jesus. By putting your faith in Jesus, you've become a little bit of that spring bursting forth into that world of winter. No matter who you were, no matter what you've done, no matter where you've been, when you put your faith in Jesus, not only do you have that hope of that future resurrection, you have a present reality of life. You're a little bit of that light bursting forth into the world of darkness. A little bit of that new creation in the old creation. A little bit of the world and the age to come bursting forth in this one. Because you live and believe in him. And in a sense, you will never die because you already live. So now, I think we need to ask ourselves a question. We need to wrestle with this text. And the question is super simple. It's the same question Jesus asked Martha. Do you believe this? Do you believe this? Do you actually believe in the bodily resurrection of Jesus? That his tomb is empty and he was raised and he will never die again? And do you believe in your own coming resurrection? And do you believe that if you live and you believe in him, you already have life? Because believing this changes everything. It changes how you talk to people. It changes how you grieve. It changes how you hope. It changes how you live. It changes everything. To know not only that you're going to experience springtime someday, but you've already begun to taste it. You've already begun to experience it because Jesus is the resurrection and the life. Do you believe this? I don't know about you, but sometimes I need reminders of this. Sometimes living in this world of darkness, a world of winter, I need reminders of the hope we have in Jesus. I need reminders that he is the resurrection and the life. And because I believe in him, though I die, yet shall I live. And as I live and believe in him, I'll never die. I need to be reminded of this, and that's why it's so important for us to get together like this. For us to sing these songs, pray these prayers, break the bread, drink the cup, and listen to the words of Jesus. This helps me to believe. And believing these things, believing in Jesus, who is the resurrection and the life, changes everything. Not just changes because something's going to happen, but changes everything because something has happened. It changes everything because the identity and the resurrection of Jesus Christ. Do you believe this? If this morning you need prayers from other people who believe this, or maybe you've lost your way, you've become hopeless, we want you to leave here with hope, feeling hopeful. We want to pray with you and listen to you and minister to you in any way we can. Or if you're ready to put Jesus on in baptism, we ask that you come forward now as we stand and as we sing.